In this episode, we talk about the Trump tax cuts recently passed by the House and how, if pushed through as the final version, it would represent a radical overhaul of the federal student loan system. Let's get started. Are your student loan payments or loan balances a major obstacle in your financial life? Then tune in and let's escape student loan debt. Hello, my name is Brenton Harrison of Escape Student Loan Debt and your host for the Escape Student Loan Debt podcast. I hope that you have had a good week so far because in transparency, if you have federal student loans, that good week is probably going to end with this episode. So my apologies in advance for the things that we're about to discuss because towards the end of this week, we saw the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. That is not me editorializing. That is literally the name of the act that was passed by the House of Administrations at the end of this week. And in that bill, there is a large amount of information when it comes to federal student loans that we need to push through and work through because it would have an outsized impact on the people who listen to this podcast. If you are a person who is aware of the financial literacy podcast that we do, New Money, New Problems, it's not affiliated with Escape Student Loan Debt. It's a separate entity, but we talk about any and everything financial literacy related, including student loans on that podcast. And on this week's episode, we actually talk about this bill in its entirety. So if you are listening to this, you hear the impact on student loans, but you want to hear the impact on other areas of your finances, I encourage you to head over and listen to that episode as well. But on this podcast, obviously, we're going to be focusing specifically on the impact of federal student loans. Before we get into that, I do want to let you know about a recent update we shared in our last episode that one of the things that was a positive that came out of the recent court dates when it comes to the Department of Education is they were required to give monthly updates on the progress that they are making when it comes to processing income-driven repayment plans and public service loan forgiveness buyback requests. So the good news is that they have given their first update. The bad news is that they have processed less than 5% of the applications that have come through for both income-driven repayment and for public service loan forgiveness buyback. If there is a silver lining, it is that they are processing applications for public service loan forgiveness buyback. The negative news, of course, is that by making such little headway, there are millions of applications out there for things like income-driven repayment plan switches that are just in limbo while we're waiting for them to be processed. So some good, some bad, until we get an update saying that they've refused to process public service loan forgiveness buyback. I would count that as a win, but it does leave you in limbo if you're hoping to have your income recalculated or switch to a new repayment plan because they seem to be moving at a snail's pace in that regard. It's also important to note that we have not to this point received more clarity on how they are going to process those applications that involve the consolidation of loans that have varying amounts of repayment forgiveness credits. So this is a big concern that I've mentioned in the past, a concern to the point that I would actually, if you have prior forgiveness credits, advise you against consolidating until we have that clarity. But as a result of all these court filings, one of the things that came out is that not only were they trying to do away with things like the SAVE plan, but they were trying to do away with all of the Biden era regulations when it comes to things like forbearance, deferment, and also how consolidated loans are credited when it comes to forgiveness credits for things like income-driven repayment and public service loan forgiveness. So until we get that clarification, I would strongly advise you to weigh heavily in your mind whether it's worth consolidating it, because if we don't have that clarity and it come to find out that I am correct in how they're going to calculate those payments, you could really, really jam yourself up if you do it without thinking it through. So, all right, now let's get into the impact of this bill when it comes to federal student loans. We're going to go a little rapid fire, but I will do my best to catch you up if this is language with which you're not familiar. Let's start with the elimination of several federal student loan payment plans. This bill does away with the extended plan and the graduated plan for federal student loans. So the only non-income driven repayment plan that would be available would be the standard plan. So you just, based on the amount of years they give you, it's very straightforward. You have an interest rate, you have a certain period of time in which you have to pay it off in full, and your payment that's calculated is going to be whatever is needed to have that payment be zero at the end of the repayment period. Now, they're also making that plan more punitive because right now you can get a standard plan between 10 and 30 years, depending on the amount that you owe. but they are taking that down to 25 years. So they're taking away 5 years of potential repayment periods for people. And I would argue that if you're going to be paying your loans off for that period, you probably would have just done income-driven repayment plans anyways. But conceptually, this is something that you need to be aware of. Hey, there is no 30-year option anymore. If this passes, it'll be 10 to 25 years, depending on certain circumstances when it comes to your loans. Now, that is the camp of the more standard type of plans. We now have to talk about the income-driven repayment plans, because this is where the rubber kind of meets the road. They are proposing eliminating all income-driven repayment plans with the exception of the old version of income-based repayment and a new plan that they are suggesting called the repayment assistance plan. And this is a huge deal because the old income-based repayment plan is one of the worst options that you have. So just so you have an idea of how heavy of an impact that would be, if we had a family of two with an adjusted gross income of $150,000 under the pay-as-you-earn plan and the new income-based repayment plan, the payment would be $994.50 a month, which is already a tremendous amount of money. Under the old version of income-based repayment, it would be $1,491 per month. So you're talking about almost $500 more per month under this plan. So what they're proposing is doing away with those other plans completely. So the only option would be old income-based repayment. So in this example, family, of two, high income, but not the craziest income in the world, they'd be paying $1,500 a month towards their student loans with no other options besides the newly instituted repayment assistance plan. Now, you might say, well, maybe that's a really good plan and I can just go to that and save a whole bunch of money. No, it's not a really good plan. The first thing that's changing with that repayment assistance plan is there is a minimum payment required no matter what. That's important because if you're a low income earner, based on the rules of the income-driven repayment plans that currently exist, you could have a payment where you're technically considered paying and receiving credit towards forgiveness, even if your calculated payment is $0. But another element of this plan that makes it more punitive is, unlike 20 years under pay-as-you-earn or new income-based repayment, or 25 years under old income-based repayment, under the repayment assistance plan, you'd have to pay for 30 years before any remaining balances would be forgiven. And here's the thing that I haven't even covered yet. If you are a current borrower, when they do away with those other payment plans, they would force you into old income-based repayment, but you'd at least have the option of that or repayment assistance plan, even though it's a terrible option. But for new borrowers, after a certain point, they won't even make old IBR the option. There would literally only be one income-driven repayment plan, and it would be the repayment assistance plan, which again requires you to pay for 30 years until remaining balances are forgiven, which is just an incredibly punitive idea to think that you could go to school for 4 years or 6 to 8 years if you went to a graduate program and then be stuck with that bill for up to 30 years if you don't pursue public service loan forgiveness. And while we're on public service loan forgiveness, there's some punitive news there because this bill proposes removing public service loan forgiveness eligibility for medical and dental residents, which is a tremendous deal. This is something that people in these professions really, really depend on. But by removing medical and dental residency as an eligible time period, you're now saying, oh, you can only start receiving credit if after your medical residency, you continue working in public service at a time when your income could triple, quadruple, quintuple. So not only are you going to potentially make less by working in public service loan forgiveness, but you don't start getting credit until that time when you're being paid far more than you were in residency. It is a tremendous disincentive for people in those industries to stay in public service unless they just have a heart for it. And I actually haven't gotten to the worst part of this. And that sounds crazy, but I'm building towards it. The next group that's heavily and negatively impacted are Parent Plus borrowers. And they're impacted multiple ways. Parent Plus loans are loans that a parent takes out for a student. It's typically something that you see when the student has exhausted their ability to receive loans at an institution, because especially at the undergrad level, there's a cap on how much you can borrow. So you might have a student who's going to Harvard. They need to take out X number of dollars in loans, but they're only approved for a lesser amount. And the parent would take up the balance by taking out a loan in their name called a Parent Plus loan that's used for their child's schooling. Well, the first way that this impacts you, that One Big Beautiful Bill Act, is it removes access to income-driven repayment plans for Parent Plus loans. That is a huge deal because even though it takes a roundabout way to get there, right now there's a process where Parent Plus loans can get the income contingent repayment plan, which is an income-driven repayment plan that under this bill would go away. But it's a plan that has a really high and terrible payment. So there's a process called a double consolidation loophole that Parent Plus borrowers will use to position themselves to have access to income-driven repayment plans at a lower price point. Well, this would say that it doesn't matter. Income contingent repayment, pay as you earn, old, new IBR, repayment assistance plan. If it's a Parent Plus loan, you're ineligible, which means that you could have a person out there who borrowed $100,000, $200,000 for their child, and the only option that they have to pay it back is to refinance it with a private lender or pay it back using the standard loan, which may be more than they can afford. But that's not the worst part. Not only does it make Parent Plus loans ineligible for income-driven repayment plans, here's the rub. Here's what we've been building to. It limits the amount of Parent Plus loans you can borrow to $50,000 in total. And even beyond that, this is for all borrowers. And this is where it really, really, gets to the point where we have to have a conversation. It eliminates Grad Plus loans. And if you're unaware, there is a limitation on how much you can borrow in undergrad. In graduate school, Grad Plus loans are used to go above and beyond those thresholds and essentially cover the gap for a high cost graduate school, which is often a PhD program, a master's program, a reputable institution, a medical school, a dental school. But not only that, it limits the amount that you can take out for all student loans in total to $200,000. That's it. And I can't even wrap my head around that because there are so many people with whom we work who owe $400,000, $300,000, $500,000 in student loans. And that's a terrible circumstance in the first place. Now they're basically being told, oh, I can't even go to this program. And if this just happens to be the only place that I got in, then the only options that I have are turning down the acceptance offer or borrowing the balance in private student loans that have less options for things like forgiveness, if not no options for forgiveness, and are more troublesome in general when it comes to repaying them. And if you're thinking that there would be like some more benevolent Department of Education that once this administration is out of office would just turn some of these things around, this bill also limits the Department of Education's ability to introduce new forgiveness programs. It also eliminates most of the borrower defense rules, which is what the Biden administration instituted, so that if you had been defrauded by your college, you could essentially have student loans forgiven if you made a valid case or if your school was on a list of schools that had already been proven to defraud their students. So, I just can't even wrap my head around this. You're limiting how much people can borrow, meaning you're going to stop people from going to certain schools. You're also saying that they're not going to have as many options to repay it. And if they do find that option, it's going to drag it out over 30 years as compared to 20 or 25. And if you're working in public service loan forgiveness, but if you work in these professions, you're not eligible during the years of your training when you need it most and would benefit from it the most. And even beyond that, it does not extend the current freeze on the taxation of forgiven loans. So right now, if you have student loans forgiven, regardless of how it's forgiven, that forgiven debt is not included on your federal income tax return. This bill would keep that intact for if your loans were forgiven due to death or disability. Loans that are forgiven under public service loan forgiveness are already not subject to income tax. But if you have your loans forgiven under an income-driven repayment plan, this is saying that that would now be included as taxable income on your federal tax return. So if you pay for 20, 25, 30, whatever, and have remaining loans, and let's say that you have $200,000 worth of loans forgiven, and you made $50,000 for that year, when you file your tax return for the tax year, it's going to make it look like you earned $250,000. So let's say that you're a single tax filer and that income puts you in the 32% tax bracket. That would mean a potential tax bill just at the federal level of $50,000, $60,000, $65,000 that you would now have to pay. And here's where we talk about the conversation of what this means when we tell people they should pursue higher education, right? Like if these things are to be passed, I asked the question on LinkedIn a few weeks ago, maybe it was a couple months ago, about like, does it always make sense to attend college. And to me, I think there are plenty of circumstances where it doesn't make sense unless you are going and you're pursuing a career that requires a graduate degree, or you're pursuing a major that is guaranteed to pay you a high income. And I was operating off of the assumption that I'm borrowing a lot of money, but I'm going to come out and I'm going to make $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. And there's all these programs that are set up for me to pay less when it comes to paying it back, or have a manageable repayment, or pursue public service loan forgiveness. And now even those are being attacked. So to me, maybe I have a different stance on it. I actually have had an argument with my wife about this when it talks about like our son and if we're going to push him into higher education. But I'm seeing more and more instances where someone is just royally getting screwed. And it's been enough times for me to say, man, you better know what you want to do with this degree. You better have a plan of action. And you can't, unfortunately, just pursue certain occupations without a pre-plan. So I'm in Nashville. My dad went to Meharry Medical College. I have worked with Meharry students for years and years and years, easily over a decade. And that's a school where it's a historically Black college. Some people go there because it's just the place where they want to be to further their education. Other people go there because it's the only place that would accept them, but they knew that if they had the opportunity, they would be able to excel at a place like Meharry. And those are big, beautiful, wonderful things. I grew up on that campus. I also know that if someone goes to a school like that and borrows all the way through, they're going to owe $400,000 plus when they come out. And at least prior to this point, there was a pathway to tell them this is not going to ruin your financial life. You will be able to still pursue wealth. This is not going to be an outsized burden on your finances. But if this passes, it changes a whole lot of advice that I give for people in terms of how they structure their finances around their student loans. And this is the reason why I'm telling people you need to reach out to your representation. You need to make sure that when it comes to other financial elements of this bill, but specific to student loans, that if you are a person who borrowed, that you say this can't pass, because if it does, it's going to add hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to my budget. It's going to add years to my life of repayment that I'm not trying to go through. And that is why advocacy, knowledge, and financial literacy is so important. And I hope that, as daunting as this sounds, that this provided some of that education, acknowledgement, advocacy, and financial literacy. So we're going to keep telling you how this bill is progressing. Again, right now it's at the Senate. If the Senate passes it, then it goes to the president's desk. The Senate could also make modifications. So there is the opportunity to change some of these things that's currently instituted. But the fact of the matter is student loans are not the biggest priority to the House or the Senate. So this may be the thing that they think will not get that much press. So it's up to you to provide that press. I hope you do so, and I hope to see you for our next episode. From Escape Student Loan Debt, this was the Escape Student Loan Debt Podcast, a show for established professionals whose student loan payments or loan balances are impacting their marriage, their business, their credit, or their dream of achieving homeownership.